Hello, welcome to the Entrepreneurs Network. I'm Rick Anthony. The publishing industry is a tough business. Ask anybody down at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Daily News, or for that matter, even closer, the folks at Delaware County Daily Times. Any of the daily newspapers have been having a very tough time competing with technology, the internet, and all of the other sources for information these days that are almost instantaneous and certainly ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Publishing a magazine is even tougher, unless you can find a niche, a target market that you can appeal to and provide them with good quality information packaged in a high quality way. Well, my guest today has identified a niche and in the process is reviving an iconic magazine that many of you will recognize. But first, John Elduff, thank you very much for being here. I met John recently as part of the entrepreneurial community in the region and became intrigued with his personal history as well as the entrepreneurial track he's been running on. So he'll be telling us today about his personal journey, where he is and where he hopes to go. As we always do, John, tell us who you are, where you came from, where you went to school, and then how you transitioned from your senior year in college to a career so far in publishing.
Okay, thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. My name's John Elduff. I've been raised in the Philadelphia area my whole life. I was raised for the majority of it in St. David's. I went to Radnor High School and then went on to college at Florida State. When I came back from college and decided to live in this area, I entered the publishing world first at medical economics, which was where I had a taste for medical publishing. And I've pretty much remained in that business ever since.
Was that just happenstance or was it by design?
No, it actually, it was happenstance. I had met someone in passing that, did that for a living. And they introduced me to the company, and I interviewed and got my first job. And
in operations or sales? Or?
In sales.
Sales, okay.
In sales. And I stayed there, for I think 4 or 5 years. And then I launched a publication on my own, so I had an entrepreneurial spirit back then, a healthcare recruitment guide. Back in the 80s, I guess the name of the game was recruitment for a lot of these institutions. So I launched a publication that had the business reply cards in the back where nurses and radiologists would circle the job interest.
When was that?
That was in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay. So healthcare was already going through the transformation.
Oh, it was explosive at that time.
Right.
Hospitals couldn't staff enough nurses, and then all the fields allied to the patient care were all in dire need. So that kind of launched a very stable foundation for a career.
What was the risk when you did that? Your risk to you, financial risk?
It was minimal. I had partners at the time, and it was a pretty sure bet that we were going to be able to, create something that was sustainable.
And did you grow and flip that one?
We did. Only mostly because the market really was more in need of a company that had more resources in terms of field forces and processing efforts. Right. So we sold that, and then moved on.
To where?
I shortly thereafter joined a division of Reed Elsevier. I stayed there for, I think initially 4.5 years. Went out because my division was sold, and then re-entered Reed Elsevier a year later. And
are they New York
for
based?
5 years. Yeah, primarily New York based.
Yeah.
They moved for a period of time. They made the Philadelphia area their headquarters, actually.
I thought so, yeah.
And the office that I worked out of for the most part was in central New Jersey. So I made the commute from here up there several times a week.
And they're a big healthcare publishing company?
Yeah, they're a substantial, they're probably the largest healthcare publisher in the world.
Okay, and that's where, I think you said you never met him, Dr. Stephen Marin, Dr. Stephen
Actually, I had a conversation about him this morning.
Did you really?
I did. So he's involved with the editor-in-chief of one of my journals, Hospital Practice, who is the chief medical officer at Jefferson.
Yeah, but he's a consummate entrepreneur, as you know.
He is.
A physician, but an entrepreneur. Okay, So when did you decide to do these publications?
Well, I had an opportunity to buy these hospital practice, postgraduate medicine, and physician and sports medicine. They were owned by McGraw-Hill. They were owned by McGraw-Hill for, geez, I think the better part of 75 years. They were a very successful franchise for the McGraw-Hill company. In fact, they had a valuation probably in the late 90s of somewhere in the 150 to 200 million range in terms of value. Yeah, so they were a substantial part of the company. In fact, we still have as a client today McGraw-Hill, who licenses back some of our content for use on one of their online.
Why did McGraw-Hill divest those assets?
Simply put, direct-to-consumer marketing. So the advertising that supported the journals throughout that 75 years were starting to be, they were diminishing at a very high rate, and the dollars that were available were heavily sought after, and it was a very complicated market for them to continue on in the format in which they had.
But obviously still a market for them. This is continuing education for physicians, right?
Well, no, this is clinical research for physicians. So the difference is, let me see if I have. This is the way the publication looked when McGraw-Hill published it.
Postgraduate medicine.
Right. So it's the same publication you see here. It was started by the Mayo brothers at the turn of the century, and this is what it looked like when they published it. Very academic-looking publication. In fact, Charlie Mayo was a surgeon, so it had a broad spectrum of appeal to a lot of the different, internal medicine, a lot of the subspecialties that went along with it. And here, after Dr. Mayo died, and the publication was run by a more marketing-oriented group, it took on a very commercial appeal, a lot of advertising. The interesting part of this business, though, is that for all the time McGraw-Hill published these publications, the one thing that they didn't really place a great deal of emphasis on is the fact that they're Medline Index publications, which means they're cited in the National Library of Medicine. So in order for any work to be credible in this day and age, for the most part, it's helpful if it's cited in the National Library of Medicine, which means it went through a peer review process and vetted out the material, and the peer review panel decided that it was worthy of publication and entrance into the Medical Library Association.
Okay, so all of these are certified, homogenized, sanctioned.
Yes, they're reviewed by a panel of peers that deem them appropriate for publication.
Okay, and is this a quarterly?
This one's a bi-monthly.
Bi-monthly? And what's hospital practice?
This is a quarterly, but we could publish weekly if we wanted to. We have enough content to publish it weekly. The key criteria here is that there is a strong need for this type of research.
But why? Well, I understand the need, but why isn't that content more accessible on the internet or an iPad or whatever?
Well, it is. I mean, our model takes into account the internet, the iPad, and Amazon distribution models.
So do you see the day when this will not be in this format?
No.
Will not be in print?
No. There's still a lot of libraries that order that each year. There's still physicians that actually want to have
as reference documents.
As reference documents, right?
It's slick. It's very nice. And then there was sports medicine.
Physician and sports medicine.
Did you buy all three of them at the same time?
I didn't. I bought physician and sports medicine and postgraduate medicine together.
Right.
They're companion partners. One represents orthopedic surgery and family docs, and this is internal medicine with all the subspecialties. So they really go together. And that was part of the problem that McGraw-Hill had when they published. They were effectively competing for the same ad dollar.
So this has been your business for how many years?
25 years.
25 years? No, these publications?
These, we're in our fourth year now with
You're in
this
your fourth
particular.
year. Okay. And obviously successful. It was a good investment. You bought the rights to them.
Yes.
And you have been successful in, I assume, retaining the market that you had and expanding the market since you took over.
We've actually grown the market quite a bit. If you look back historically, when McGraw-Hill was publishing it, this was in 2001. This was when the market was probably about at its prime, maybe starting to see it, fade a little bit. With the amount of content, total number of pages was 138 pages, of which 55% of that's advertising. So we publish, between 180 and 200 pages in every issue. So if you multiply it out, even at 4 times a year,
Yep.
then you're looking at a considerable amount more content being published.
Okay, so here's good old John, who's made a couple of really smart moves, continuing to play the niche markets, niche opportunities, narrowly defined, and still a young man with most of his career ahead of him, who decides to make a leap from this niche to consumer publishing. So
yes.
Before I give that away, tell us how the opportunity came about and why and how you decided to take the risk of reviving an iconic publication.
Well, it's really not that much different than what we did over here.
Okay.
This was started by the Mayo family.
Right.
So this was a franchise at the turn of the century. It was so successful and so prominent that a society was formed of hospital or family doctors to offset the threat of this being the mainstay for all primary care doctors. So it had a very successful history and legacy. So it wasn't a stretch for us to understand how to apply that principle. All we did was change the model. Originally, it was an advertising-based model. Here, we're selling content.
Okay.
It's all about the content. Here, it was all about the advertising. So it's slightly different.
Well, the rules have changed
model.
as well, haven't they?
The rules have changed.
Mixing advertising with academic or research content.
Well, from a publisher standpoint, this used to carry a high component or part of the business being that of continuing education. And you could house the two on the same website, if you will. We saw that as a conflict, so we disbanded that when we set up the new websites, and we don't have continuing education for our product. If a university wants to come to us and license the content and then apply some type of educational component to it, we're more than willing to do that. But right now, that's not in our best interest to try to serve two masters. That's almost church and state, if you will. But what we did focus on is providing easy-to-understand content for primary care doctors. That's really the focus here.
Can you divulge your circulation or distribution?
Yeah, for this one, our electronic circulation is about 350,000, and we've got about 15,000 in print with every issue.
How many docs are there in the country? Physicians? Approximately.
Between 700,000 and 800,000.
Okay, so you have a big chunk of them.
Yeah.
And what about sports medicine?
Sports medicine's about 145,000 and approximately 3,000 in print.
Isn't that a relatively new practice, sports medicine, that is? And I say relatively.
Well, it's, in relative terms,
Yeah.
I guess, in the past 40 years, it's really been developed. This was one of the first sports medicine journals, if not the very first, started in 1973. So its original intent was for doctors that like sports.
I keep taking you backward.
That's okay. That's okay.
But you said, though, that the model was essentially the same for your new venture as for this venture. How
It
so?
is.
How so?
Well, what we're doing here, in our attempt to create or re-emerge this well-known publication was started in 1888. In an attempt to do that, the purpose behind that is to create a tool for patient education. See, the consumer is a patient.
Yes.
And the patient that we're appealing to, for the most part, knows what that publication is.
I see.
See, at its height, that publication had a circulation weekly of 3.5 million. So even if we burned everything that existed on this planet because it had a global distribution, you're going to be still left with enough residue in closets that people know what that publication is and stands for.
And that publication is Colliers. Colliers magazine.
Colliers, and it's got a very warm. It's had a very warm welcome to a lot of the recipients of it.
This issue from May 30th, 1953, when it cost 15 cents.
15 cents.
And I think you have another one in here that was 10 cents. several years before that. All right, so how did you become aware this was available? And why did you seize on the opportunity?
Well, I was in an acquisition mode, and they were having a trademark auction, and I identified that as a target. And I had
trademark auction?
Trademark auction, where they auction content and trademarks and...
For just publications or for anything?
Well, there were a lot of branded products
Yeah.
involved in the trademark. I bought about 10 trademarks that particular day. It's funny, they focused on the one trademark that I purchased and interviewed my son, who actually did the research and made the acquisition for us. But that was the one that caught all the attention and many of the interviews, as you all know. So
well, I'm intrigued by that. So where is a trademark auction, where does it take place?
this one was in New York.
How often are they conducted?
I'm really not sure. This one, we were searching for publications for sale, and that's how it came up.
Was there a lot of bidding?
I wasn't there.
Oh, your son.
I wasn't there. I sent someone bid for me, but from what I understand, it was not that unlike most other auctions where you have 500 people and 3 people that are there to buy. So I think that was the format.
All right. So you bought the rights. Now what?
Well, so we wanted a patient education tool that had high visibility and a good history. So before we made the acquisition, we did the research. We realized that Colliers was responsible for the Pure Food and Drug Administration Act of 1906. So its first partner was the American Medical Association. So it's got a very rich medical history. The part about the investigative journalism and the muckraking, that really didn't come into play. I thought that the number of readers and subscribers they had really spoke volumes for the publication and its presence. So what we then identified is that we had a platform from which to work. And you know, with authors like Ernest Hemingway and J.D. Salinger, I mean, you've got Winston Churchill. They were regular authors for this publication.
When did it stop publishing?
In 1957.
And it's been dormant since then?
It's been dormant, right.
When did you make the acquisition, purchase the rights?
I believe it was December of 2010.
Quite recent. And you set about to take the original and improve on it, but with a twist in terms of circulation and distribution. This, let's get to the new and revived. This is the new Colliers. Oversized, slick, very slick, beautiful photography, beautiful graphics, but designed for a specific venue, audience. Where are people likely to see this now? Well,
they're likely to see it on some newsstands.
Right.
We're working out a better distribution platform for that. But in doctors' offices.
Principally doctors' offices.
Principally doctors' offices. We stacked it with a lot of subscription cards in there. And we were so anxious to get it out the door, we hadn't received the permits from the post office for the reply cards. So we're still getting hordes of cards by the day now with stamps affixed to them, which was a pretty good testament that we're on track. So it seems to be working. Its presence is out there, and the distribution model always was to deliver the information to the physician's office. Now, what we're doing now is it's a little bit interesting how we matched it, but a lot of the articles and about 40% of the content here is medically related, so it's going to have interest to the readership. And the physician that would be the recipient of it would receive that clinical information for the professional over here. So what we've created is a method for dialogue to take place between the physician and the patient.
Interesting.
Right now, if a pharmaceutical company were to advertise their product on the air or in a consumer publication, they would be doing so with the hope that that crossed path with the consumer shortly before they were to see their physician. And then they'd have to rely too much on recall at that point in time.
Okay. This is the first of the revived Colliers. First issue?
It is.
Okay. And this is bi-monthly?
Bi-monthly.
Bi-monthly. And if folks want to subscribe to this, they can do what? Go to the website on the screen?
They can go to the website on the screen and
www.colliersmagazine.com.
.com.
And they would pay, well, the cover price is $5.95?
And they'd pay $5.95 for it, and that would include postage and handling.
Okay. And the target market is pretty broad, age 40 to 90?
Yeah, so there's something for everybody in there. I mean, the makeup of the publication, we talk about money. Our first author that was willing to submit was Newt Gingrich. And when he submitted the article, you know, he was at his top of the heap in terms of the election. And we maintain a presence that we are interested in serving all components of the population, not just one segment. So we have, very conservative politicians submitting an article, and we're hopeful to get more of the liberal politicians submitting articles.
You mentioned Hemingway before, and there is a piece here about Hemingway?
There is. We were recently contacted by HBO because they are launching a miniseries on Hemingway, and it just so happens that Colliers is a fixture throughout the entire miniseries. So we couldn't have been at a better place at a better time.
Yes. I think why an article on Okinawa 66 years later?
Well, it's it's interesting. It was a well-written piece. I don't know that I personally agree with it, but the perspective on Okinawa was from the civilians that live there, from their perspective. And modern day, it has a lot of facets that if you read it and then read an article, this particular article will be followed up with an article from the American perspective on what was happening, then between the two of them somewhere lies the truth.
And then the article on a local icon, Pete Musser.
Yeah, so Pete Musser, he was accessible, and he truly has done a lot for local businesses. And
yes, he has.
He was willing to...
Made a lot of money for a lot of people.
Yeah. So he's a very interesting man.
Yeah.
He's very, very vibrant, very active, and I think he's still doing a lot of business.
He is indeed. Yes, he's young for his age. He's young, but it's wonderful. And what can we expect to see in the future issues? You must have the second, third, fourth already pretty well locked in.
Yeah,
you have to do that, right, to plan that far ahead.
You do. We're already loaded with 4 issues worth of content. So what we do is we try to focus on research that's coming through, that's going to apply to a patient somewhere in the equation, and we factor that into our entire scheduling process, and then we try to keep current with events. On our website, we have 2 blogs. One is from a local advocate that talks about how to get what you want and not take no for an answer. And the other is for a former colleague of mine that's over in London, who talks about what's happening from the British perspective. So you get
in medicine, in healthcare, or just generally.
Generally,
okay.
Generally. Although his background
it should be an interesting perspective.
It is. It's very interesting. I suggest you go to the website and look at his blog.
Okay. And what is the website?
It's colliersmagazine.com.
Okay. All right. What I didn't see in here was a lot of nostalgia, and I guess I would have expected that the revival of Colliers that would be a great appeal to people 60 and older, maybe 55, 60 and older, that there would be more nostalgia in here. The good old days, the old-fashioned ways, home remedies, those kinds of things. Will I see more of that in future issues?
You will. We're starting to catalog a lot of the content that we can gain copyright to republish it, and you'll see a lot more of that. If you take a look at it, though, it does have hints throughout.
Yeah.
of the old
Okay,
Colliers.
now you're an entrepreneur, you're a business person. You bought this asset with a vision of what it could become. And obviously it ties in beautifully with an asset you'd already purchased and built. So it's a great story of integration and innovation, how to take something and leverage it and get more value out of it. Where do you see this going?
Well, we've already done some interesting things. Our partner on all of the publications now is Dr. Oz, and the Share Care Network. So all of our content is being offered for them to use as part of their programming, and they can have professional Q&A and consumer Q&A, which is going to be helpful for us, and it should move a lot of our content as well. And we've been contacted by HBO to consider a partnership with them on this new Hemingway series. So since Colliers is a very integral part of the entire Hemingway story, then we foresee that as being as strong.
But as the healthcare debate, for example, continues, do you see this editorially taking an advocacy position on any aspect of healthcare?
No,
or are you going to stay away from that?
Yeah, we're gonna present the facts.
Yeah.
And we're gonna try to present perspectives, so everyone is entitled to submit some type of challenge to that, or rebuttal, or continuation of the work that we publish.
We're blessed in this area, as you know, with a number of creative writers. I recently had 2 of them on as guests. They're novelists. But do you solicit articles? I'm sure you're receiving unsolicited requests from around the country now for people who would love to be published.
Daily.
Daily?
Daily.
Okay. What are the criteria that you use to select people to contribute?
Well, we've got formats to follow. They're all online. We're looking for a well-written piece, and we check it for accuracy and try to make a determination as to whether or not it's original work. Other than that,
who's responsible for the graphics?
We've got a terrific artist that does the layout and
this is bold, again, as compared with the originals. Will we continue to see these bold, splashy colors?
You will. John McNamara has agreed to do a series of covers for us, and in the next issue, you'll be very surprised by what you see with that.
You've been, I don't know, maybe luck always plays a part in this, some part of the equation, but you've been lucky. You've obviously been very bright, smart in the moves you've made. What advice do you give to people who are even younger than you, who aspire to become successful entrepreneurs? What lessons have you learned? You apparently haven't made too many mistakes, at least none that you're admitting to. What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs?
Well, first of all, you never asked me if I've made any mistakes, and the answer to that is yes, I have.
That's another show.
Absolutely. For starters, I'd rather be lucky than good. And if you're lucky and you've got a good team around you, that's good, then you're blessed. You've got to be willing to take the risk, and you've got to at least think about what the vision is before you start. If you've got a good concrete vision and you're willing to test yourself on that, perform a little SWOT test to determine whether or not you've actually identified a market, then I'd say for all intents and purposes, you've got a good start.
Good advice, and on behalf of all the people of my vintage who long for the good old days, the simple life, when covers look more like this, almost Rockwellian, I thank you for bringing this back and look forward to each and every issue. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for your support.
It's been my pleasure.
Appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, you can get the Colliers at www.colliersmagazine.com. Take a look. Until next time, this is the Entrepreneurs Network. I'm Rick Anthony. Take good care of yourselves.